We still have this ongoing sham audit in Arizona, and it's very unpopular, and that's completely the whole point. Basically, did Republicans in Arizona screw the pooch by ordering a fake audit of the 2020 presidential vote in Maricopa County? According to an article published Tuesday at Politico, some Republican operatives in the Grand Canyon state are beginning to fear that the whole gambit by conspiracy theories who who believe that Donald Trump was the real winner of the state was a big mistake. Turns out that the voters, correctly understanding it's all a farce meant to undermine the validity of their choice of Joe Biden as president, are hostile to the entire enterprise. One of the pollsters, Ferdinand Armandi, warned Republicans that while the audit is bloody red meat for the maggot Republican base, it's also giving Democrats the opportunity to make the case to Arizona voters to stick with them. Sean Noble, who's a Republican organizer in the state, agreed, telling Politico it's all a feeler, it's a joke. Noble's concerns are shared by many Republican leaders in the state, as Zachary Patricio reported for Salon last week. The polling data in Arizona doesn't look great for the backers of the audit, which was ordered by the Republican-controlled state legislature in response to Trump's lies about an election that was stolen from him, which in reality it wasn't stolen. Amandi's poll of the state showed Arizona voters opposed the audit 49-46, showing a remarkably strong understanding that it's a QAnon-style circus, despite it being packaged as merely an exercise in T-crossing and I-dotting. And moreover, intensity of opposition to the audit exceeded the intensity of support, and independent voters upon one of the state pivots in close elections opposed the audit by 18 percentage points. But while all of these statistics are true, what this kind of analyst fails to understand is that the folks behind the fake audit don't care if it's popular with voters. This whole exercise is not about winning anymore. It's not about persuading skeptics that Trump's big lie was true, because it isn't, and it's certainly not about persuading swing voters to choose Republicans in 2022 or 2024. After all this whole winning over voters thing is a relic of the world that the Arizona audit team and the majority of Republicans are ready to leave behind. This fake audit is about something else entirely. It's about pushing for a post-voting society where the very idea that leaders are chosen through fair elections is cast aside in favor of a more authoritarian system. It's about advocating for a system where voter choice doesn't really matter because they're getting Republican leaders whether we like it or not. On Wednesday, Politico published another article about how Trump sycophants are spreading the audit playbook across the country, and they want a similar fake theatrical review of the results in states which include Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And this is understandably upsetting to state election officials across the nation who say that efforts to further inflame conspiracy theories and erode faith in the American democratic system. Of course, inflaming conspiracy theories and eroding faith in democracy is the entire point. It's a future, not a fucking bug. As people wrote back in May, the three-ring circus around the Arizona audit is not an accident, but a very deliberate choice on the part of the organizers. There has never been any desire to make the exercise seem professional or trustworthy at all, but the opposite. And what the organizers understand, and many critics don't, is that the first step to replacing democracy with an authoritarian government is turning democracy into a fucking joke. It's about taking conservatives who are bitter about losing 2020 and radicalizing them to believe that the solution is to destroy the very concept of the free and fair elections. On Monday, Morning Consult released a troubling poll that shows that 26% of Americans meet the definition of the Republican authoritarian, which is defined by the psychology researcher Bob Altmaier as the desire to submit to some authority, aggression that is directed against whoever the authority says should be targeted, and a desire to have everybody follow the norms and social conventions that the authority says should be followed. And for comparison, the percentage of Americans who are right-wing authoritarians in the U.S. is double that of Canada and Australia. It's a mindset that has come to define the modern Republicans. Republicans are a shrinking minority in the U.S., and as their ability to hold on to power by winning over voters disappears, their base is increasingly drawn to the idea that elections are not a legitimate way of allocating power. But while they are intrigued by the idea of an authoritarian America, many of them likely don't know exactly what such a thing would look like. As Zach Beauchamp of Vox recently wrote in a must-read piece, the model that GOP leaders are circling around is what is called competitive authoritarianism. This is where the illusion of democracy is propped up, but the reality is a one-party minority rule. And this is accomplished by rigging elections enough to maintain power indefinitely, while still permitting enough democracy that citizens don't rise up in outrage. Beauchamp offers some international examples like Hungary. As Paul Campos at Lawyers, Guns, and Money points out, this also effectively describes Mexico for the decades that they were a camouflaged dictatorship under the rule of the PRI. But American conservatives aren't known for their interest in looking at international models. So that's where the fake audit in Arizona and the desire to hold similar events in other states comes in. If you want to know what it would look like to create the appearance of an election and voting counting process while still having a predetermined outcome, then the Arizona audit will be perfect for you. It pretends to be a democratic event meant to ensure a valid outcome, but no one, not the organizers or their critics, actually believes that it's a fair count or that any other outcome is possible beyond the declaration that Trump was the real winner. After all, the guy running the whole thing is a conspiracy theorist who participates in other propaganda efforts that are meant to undermine democracy. Indeed, the farcical nature of the whole thing is the point. In authoritarian governments, it's important to demoralize the opposition by making them believe that the whole system is a joke and that while resistance is useless, the Arizona audit is a trial balloon to show how this would work. Voters hate it, but they aren't particularly motivated to fight back because there's no real sense of how one could do that. The outcome is predetermined, so the most you can do is shrug and fucking move on. The implicit message to Republicans is that their actual vote counting system could be replaced by a similar farce and that it would get a similarly helpless response from voters who hate it but feel powerless to stop it. Arizona is already making moves to strip authority from election officials and give it to GOP clowns that run the legislature, so the possibility of replacing legitimate vote counting with a sham that looks like the fake audit is not as fantastical as it may seem. But for decades, the American political press has relied heavily on polling data as the main metric to analyze the effectiveness of various political actions that are taken by the parties. After all, is X or Y action popular with the voters is a good question. But it says, but it's increasingly clear that Republican leaders aren't bound by this particular metric because they believe that they can render voter preferences irrelevant. And sure, voters in Arizona hate the fake audit, but Republicans are working towards a country where voters' opinions don't really matter much at all. But yep.